Welcome to BookPilot, your destination for powerful ideas from the world's most impactful books. Today, we're diving into the central ideas and the really dark, hidden psychological frameworks behind the book, Why the People You Help Always Betray You. It's a fascinating look at an interpersonal dynamic that literally ruins relationships. And, understanding this is absolutely crucial if you want to help others without accidentally blowing up your own life in the process. So, let's travel back for a second to September 24th, 867 AD, right in the heart of Constantinople. The Emperor of Byzantium, Michael III, is fast asleep. The man quietly walking toward his bed isn't an assassin or a stranger. In fact, the emperor actually found this man in a stable, fed him, promoted him, draped him in expensive silk, and in an act of generosity no emperor had ever shown a peasant, literally crowned him co-ruler of the entire Roman world. His name was Basil. But tonight, well, that peasant has come to collect something else. By sunrise, the most generous emperor in Byzantine memory is dead, and the man he pulled out of horse manure is sitting on his throne. Now, you've probably been told this is just a classic story about human evil, but it actually isn't. It's a story about a completely hidden psychological law, one that's operating right now on every single person you have ever helped. Around 18 centuries before psychology even had a proper name for this phenomenon, the Roman historian Tacitus hit the nail right on the head with this brilliant observation. What's so wild about Tacitus's quote is the core paradox it reveals. Helping someone out of a dark place doesn't actually create loyalty. It creates an unbearable ledger of debt. And eventually, that debt demands a brutal erasure. Tacitus wasn't making some moral judgment here. He was just reporting a mechanism. It's the exact same mechanism that explains why that friend you supported through a really tough time now flinches whenever your name comes up, or why the colleague you spent hours training is suddenly undermining you. In this summary, we're going to unpack this by looking at 4 psychological engines of betrayal: the burden of unpayable debt, the mirror of weakness, the target on the saints, and the rescuer's trap. And then we'll wrap up with 5 actionable rules for correct giving. Let's jump right into part 1. The burden of unpayable debt. To really understand this burden, think back to Emperor Michael showering unending wealth and power onto Basil. That wasn't just kindness, right? It was actually a prime example of fatal generosity. Back in 1980, a psychologist named Martin Greenberg completely dismantled our biggest assumption about this kind of giving with something he called indebtedness theory. He showed that a massive, unpayable debt doesn't create endless thankfulness like we'd expect. Instead, it triggers an aversive arousal state in the nervous system. Basically, it feels like a physical threat. The person you helped starts to feel owned by you, rather than grateful. And when that feeling becomes agonizing, the human mind desperately looks for a shortcut to make it stop. And the fastest way to do that? Remove the creditor. Burn the ledger entirely.
There's a really stark contrast between these two emotions. Gratitude is warm, mostly because it can be repaid. The books can eventually close. But indebtedness, that is endless, and it's threatening. The anthropologist Marcel Mauss actually found this exact dynamic way back in the 1920s when he was studying the potlatch ceremonies of the Pacific Northwest tribes. In these ceremonies, chiefs would shower a rival with extreme gifts, sometimes even destroying their own wealth right in front of them. But the rival didn't feel blessed by this. They felt attacked. It was universally recognized as an act of warfare designed to make that rival kneel. And here's the thing. Our modern culture runs on this exact same code. We just kind of deleted the honesty.
Which brings us to part 2, the mirror of weakness. So why don't debtors simply walk away? Why do they actively rewrite their own memories to turn their saviors into villains? Well, the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche performed a sort of autopsy on the human conscience and noticed something absolutely fascinating hiding inside the German language itself. The German word for guilt, Schuld, is the exact same word for debt. To owe someone, deep down in the oldest wiring of our species, is to stand perpetually accused before them. Nietzsche called this ressentiment, which is this poisonous resentment where the powerless, unable to attack directly, reorganize their entire moral universe just to label their benefactor as evil. So the absolutely crucial point here is this. When you help someone substantially and repeatedly, you become a walking exhibit of their lowest moment. You are quite literally the photograph of their weakness that breathes. Every single time they look at you, their ego is forced to eat dinner with their rock bottom. And the human ego, it simply cannot survive that kind of witness. So what does it do? It renovates memory. The kneeling never happened. Your selfless sacrifices are totally rewritten as manipulative control. They tell themselves, oh, you only did it to feel superior. Let's move on to part 3, the target on the saint. Now, we've talked about the individual debtor, but what about the surrounding group of onlookers? The people who eagerly cheer for the generous person's downfall? In psychology, this is known as do-good or derogation. A 2010 Washington State resource game study, along with a 2012 Wharton vegetarian study, proved this chilling reflex is very real. Groups will enthusiastically tear down their most generous contributor. But why? Because the helper's existence serves as a silent accusation. They make everyone else look bad. If you're the one in the office who's always working late and helping everyone out, the room is quietly holding its breath, just waiting for you to stumble. When the person you saved finally turns on you, they're going to find an audience strangely eager to believe that your help had strings attached. Why? Because your downfall magically releases everyone else from your high standard. Okay, let's look at part 4, and fair warning, this one hits a little close to home: the rescuer's trap. This brings us to perhaps the most uncomfortable entry on our ledger because it forces us to examine our own hidden, sometimes selfish motives for rescuing people in the first place. Mapped out in 1968, the Cartman Drama Triangle shows us that these aren't personality types we're talking about. They are seats in a game. And swooping in unasked to rescue someone staples the victim identity right onto their forehead. Structurally speaking, you are holding them in victimhood. Sure, for a little while the help feels good, but eventually the only move the triangle allows a victim who desperately wants out is to rotate. The victim becomes the persecutor. And who is the only logical target for the persecutor? The rescuer. You aren't ambushed by this ending. By casting them as the helpless project, you essentially audition them for it. So we have to ask a really hard question here, backed by Konstantin Sedekidis' 2012 study on communal narcissism. Are we actually just satisfying a grandiose hunger by believing we are the ultimate savior? Sometimes extreme helping is literally just dominance fully laundered, wearing an apron. It's a velvet leash, carefully designed to keep others dependent so we can feel central to their lives. And listen, people will always eventually bite the hand that holds the leash, especially a velvet one, because they can't protest it without sounding absolutely insane. So how do we fix this? That brings us to part 5. Rules for correct giving. What's the play here? Is the answer to just stop helping anyone and seal yourself off in a cave? No, of course not. That is the reaction of a panicked mind, not a strong one. We can absolutely still be generous. We just need to stop being entirely naive about it. So, here are 5 actionable rules that completely disarm those engines of betrayal we just talked about. The strong don't stop giving, they just stop giving incorrectly. Let's break these down real quick. Rule 1. Never rescue the unasked. Unrequested help isn't actually help. It's casting someone as incapable. It immediately puts you right at the top of that drama triangle. Always ask, hey, do you want a hand with this? If they say no, honor it. By waiting to be asked, you preserve their dignity, kind of like a contract. Rule 2. Keep every debt repayable. Now, we often think that refusing repayment feels super noble, right? But what it actually does is slam the ledger shut forever, permanently trapping them in debt. Instead, let them buy you dinner. Let them return a small favor. This simple act stops the debt from crossing that toxic threshold of reciprocity, where gratitude curdles into resentment. Rule 3. Become forgettable. The unbearable part of being helped isn't the help itself, it's the witness. So you've got to develop strategic amnesia. Never reference the help with your words, your tone, or even your eyes. The very best givers have effectively burned their own copy of the ledger. Rule 4. Help upward and sideways. The author Robert Greene, in his 10th Law, strictly warns against binding yourself to the perpetually drowning. If every single person you support is beneath you in stability, well, your giving isn't charity anymore, it's an org chart. Direct your generosity toward equals. Because when you help equals, it reads as an alliance, not a rescue mission. And finally, Rule 5, give from overflow. Nietzsche's wisdom from Zarathustra reminds us that true giving must pour from a surplus that requires absolutely no gratitude. The very second you need loyalty or thanks in return, it stops being a gift. It becomes a transaction with hidden pricing. And hidden pricing is exactly what people eventually refuse to pay. As we wrap up this summary, I want you to run Tacitus's colder audit on the person you've helped the most in your life. Ask yourself honestly, is the debt still small enough that the books can one day close? Or did you, gift by gift, push it way past the threshold where gratitude quietly converts into hatred? And finally, the most penetrating question of all. When you picture them finally standing on their own 2 feet, completely independent, not needing you for a single thing, does that picture feel like a victory? Or does something deep inside you register it as a loss? Your honest answer to that question reveals whether your kindness is designed to build capable people or to manufacture permanent debtors. If you enjoyed this audiobook summary and want to discover more powerful ideas from great books, subscribe to BookPilot and stay tuned for more.